Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Wednesday, October 28th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. Ohio State's next game at Penn State, just 3 days away. The game against Michigan is in 45 days. While the Michigan game gets more attention in Columbus, this weekend's game at Penn State could be the biggest hurdle the Buckeyes have to clear in order to reach the Big Ten title game again this year. My guest today is Donnie Collins. He's covered Penn State football for the Scranton Times-Tribune since 2004. Donnie, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
And before we get into this weekend's game, I wanted to take a quick run through some of the craziness from last Saturday in Bloomington. I think most people probably saw that final play and the resulting photoshops, but a whole lot of weird stuff happened before then as well. For one thing, Penn State had a 21-20 lead, had the ball at the Indiana 14 with 1:47 left on the clock, only one timeout left for the Hoosiers. And then on the first play, running back Devin Ford took a handoff. Indiana was clearly letting him score, and Ford kind of slowed down and then ended up crossing the goal line like he wasn't quite sure what to do. That gave Indiana a chance to go down the field and tie it up. Listening to James Franklin after the game, it seemed like he was implying that he had told them not to score, but that maybe he didn't make that totally clear to the players. Like, what was your read on that situation?
Yeah, I think James was kind of trying to take the heat for a really young running back who they really desperately need right now to be confident and to be sure of himself. But the reality of the situation is they told him to get as many yards as he could and then go down. He did the first part and he didn't do the last. And the problem there is Indiana had one timeout. I think there was 1:47 left when the drive started. And if he goes down at the 1 yard line, Penn State probably is able, I think if my math is right, is able to probably take some knees and win the game 21-20. But Ford scores and leaves, they go up 28-20 and leaves about a minute and a half to go. And obviously, for the first time in the entire game, Indiana put the drive together. And that drive for Indiana, I want people to go back and watch what they were able to accomplish, because Penn State actually played a great defensive drive. I think Michael Penix Jr. hit some receivers who were covered, and he was under a lot of pressure on that drive. Shaka Toney and Jason Owe really had a great drive, the defensive ends at Penn State. And they just executed the entire drive and deserved to win the game from there, no matter what happened in overtime. And in overtime, we could debate, the Penix stretch at the end, whether he got in or not. But the bottom line is you can simultaneously deserve to win or deserve to lose and should have won. And I think Penn State was both. I think the call was wrong, but they certainly didn't deserve to win the game because they made so many mental errors and made so many physical mistakes in the game that they let Indiana kind of have that one.
Well, we talked about the touchdown that they probably shouldn't have scored, and we talked about the play at the end that was the did he or didn't he get to the pylon. But there was also, Penn State got themselves in a position to kick a 57-yard field goal at the gun at the end of regulation, and that ended up like just short. I couldn't tell on TV if that was half a yard short or 4 yards short, but it looked like it might have had the distance kind of off the foot. Then they had the lead on overtime and then losing that crazy finish. Outgained Indiana 5.6 yards per play to 3.3. And normally you think, they must have been -7 in turnovers or whatever, what Michigan State did on Saturday. No, they were -1. Like, it was they outplayed them. It seems like it was a game that they win 19 times out of 20, and this happened to be that 20th time. So does that game change what you think the ceiling is for Penn State this season, or was it just kind of one of those days?
It doesn't change what I think the ceiling is. I think not as much as losing Journey Brown and Noah Cain does, but they also missed a 25-yard field goal right at the end of the first half. And if they hit that, it's kind of a different game because they're able to go up 2 scores. You don't know how it's going to go, but that's possible. While it doesn't change, I think the ceiling is for the team. It does change one big thing. They do have to win this weekend. It's not a situation where they could lose a close game again to Ohio State and still be considered a playoff contender. If they lose this one, it's over. So this game is everything to Penn State this weekend. They could now. Granted, that the positive side of that is they could right the ship. They go out and they win the game. Nobody remembers Indiana, and in fact, you might get a few people who say, well, they really did beat Indiana. Judging by what happened at the end, look at the stats, whatever. But if they lose to Ohio State, they're 0-2, and then they got some big questions to ask themselves, not only about this season, but where are we as a program? Because they're really, because of COVID, because of a lot of different things, they're really lagging behind. Their recruiting class is, I think, barely top 30 this year for the class of 21. They've lost some kids that everybody thought they were going to get. And this is not going to help. An 0-2 start's just not going to help get these guys where they want to be. And then they got a tough road game against Michigan later in the year, and they never play well in Ann Arbor for whatever reason. So I think this weekend's game, I mean, that's the one thing, that's the one difference I think for Penn State, just judging it against the other games they played against Ohio State over the last 4 or 5 years. This one, they have to have it. I mean, it's just not even a debate.
You mentioned earlier, Journey Brown, obviously out for the year. We knew that already. Tuesday, James Franklin announced that Noah Cain is done for the season as well. So who is left at running back for Penn State right now? And then how important is the quarterback position going to be now in that rushing attack?
Yeah, I mean, so what they have at the running back position is still pretty good. I mean, it's basically, an Ohio State situation if they were to lose Thurman and Master Teague, who I'm sure they have a really good back at number 3. I'm sure it was a 4 or 5-star kid, and that's what Penn State has with Devin Ford. But experience means something, and Ford's experience so far is what you saw last week against Indiana. He had 20 carries for 69 yards. He had some holes and didn't hit them. His biggest run of the game was the 14-yard touchdown, which ironically they wish was a shorter run. But they have him, and they have 2 4-star prospects from last year's recruiting class. I mean, Keziah Holmes, they're both out of Florida. Keziah Holmes can really run. He is probably the fastest guy who anybody got in any recruiting class. But he looked only okay against Indiana. And Kevon Lee he's a big bruiser. He looked really good against Indiana, but he only had 6 carries. So you really don't know. And James Franklin said today, hey, look, we really would have preferred for the early part of the season for them to just kind of sit and watch and get experience on the practice field. But now the maturation process has to begin. So it's they're good prospects. Could they come out and shock you? Yeah. I mean, Saquon Barkley did it. They lost to Temple in the opening game in 2015, I believe it was, or 14, whichever year. But they lost the opening game, and Akeel Lynch had about 35 carries, and Saquon Barkley had 1. And then the next week, Saquon Barkley was Saquon Barkley. So maybe one of these kids are close to that, but you can't bet on that. It didn't look like that was going to be the case. And I think they're going to be really relying on Devin Ford to get a lot better. The other thing they're going to be relying on, as you saw against Indiana, is Sean Clifford to make some plays with his legs. And that's something I'm not sure they were really focusing on when Kirk Ciarrocca came in from Minnesota as the new offensive coordinator. I think, Tanner Morgan didn't run a bunch last year. And I think they would have preferred to kind of just keep Clifford in the pocket, let him make plays on the move. But I think we're going to see some more designed runs this week from Clifford than we did last week, because a lot of those runs last week weren't designed. He just kind of took off, but he had a lot of success. He ran for 119 yards. But I'll dare say that if Sean Clifford is their leading rusher this week, they're not going to win.
Yeah, that was something that Nebraska had some success with against Ohio State. I would not be surprised to see that be a decent chunk of Penn State's game plan, at least. Since those scholarship restrictions kicked in 8 years ago or whatever it was, one of the consistent issues that we've seen over and over with Penn State is with the offensive line. It seemed like it took a long time. They got into a pretty deep hole in terms of depth issues because of those scholarship restrictions. And that is a tough thing to dig out of. I mean, that we saw that with USC when they had their scholarship stuff, happened with Penn State as well. It seems from a distance like they might finally have the bodies and the talent to put a pretty solid line out there this year. How would you assess the talent level of this year's offensive line?
Yeah, you make an interesting point going back to the sanctions back in 13 or 14 or whenever they really started to take place. Bill O'Brien, when he was here, he really kind of tried to focus the scholarships they did have on skill position guys, and he did a really good job of it. He got Chris Godwin in, and he got Hackenberg, he got Barkley, he got a lot of really great Franklin got Barkley, but he got a lot of really great players in, and they were able to get rid of the ball quick and use his offense to kind of mask what was really not a good offensive line. They had a good offensive line in 16, a good enough offensive line to win the championship in the Big Ten, but really it hasn't taken very many big strides. And over the offseason, they let Matt Lime grow over there. He had been their offensive line coach since 2016. They let him go and brought in Phil Trautwein from Boston College, and they had some really good offensive lines up there. And this year they really thought that this was going to be a big year for their offensive line. They had 5 guys who had started games last year coming back. I mean, Will Fries and Michael Mennett, they've started, I think, 3 times each against Ohio State. So they've been They've been big factors, and they were supposed to take the next step this year. And I think I think Menet played well last week, but I don't think they. If you watch the Indiana game, go watch the first series. That's what they thought of their offensive line. They just ran the ball right at Indiana, marched downfield, took a 6-7 minute drive, scored a touchdown. Very physical, and I think they thought they were going to win battles in the trenches against Indiana, and they didn't consistently enough. So it'll be interesting to see if that's a first game thing, or if it's a different kind of game plan thing, and what they do against Ohio State this weekend. But I thought the offensive line would be better in the first game than it was. I still think it could be really good. They have 6 guys they play a lot, and really 7 guys because they bring Des Holmes. He's a guard tackle combo guy. He comes in and plays a lot. But I don't think they're going to try to physically run it down Ohio State's throat like they did to Indiana. But they're going to count on the offensive line. If the offensive line's not good, they're not going to win. But I think this group has potential to be outstanding this year. Whether they get there, I don't know. And it would be a personnel thing, I think. But next year it'll be interesting because they don't have a lot of bodies coming back next year who've got a lot of playing time. So I think offensive line play in this game is going to be huge for Penn State, and they have potential to do it. Whether they will, I don't know.
Well, next year, if the offensive line is kind of the question mark because of all those personnel losses, this year that was a thing at the wide receiver position. They lost a ton of talent there after last season. How has that unit come together so far, and how important was it for tight end Pat Freiermuth to opt back in and play this season?
Yeah, they needed Freiermuth. These guys weren't a top 10 team to start in any poll if Freiermuth didn't come back. They lost every other big player they had. They really needed him, and he scored a touchdown on the first series, and he dropped a pass last week, but he generally looked pretty good, looked like himself. But they need more plays out of the receiver position. I mean, and I think really when you get down to it, Penn State fans debate, what do we need to do to become what Ohio State is? And it's that. You need a big time quarterback, and you need those receivers to help them out. I mean, Ohio State, they have 4 or 5 5-star guys who you look at them and they're just physically outstanding. And Penn State doesn't have that. And last week, they looked okay last week. But they got a couple of freshmen who got in there and played. Parker Washington they really like, but he's kind of built like a running back. He's a possession kind of guy. He makes a lot of tough catches, but I don't know if he's going to separate from anybody. DeAndre Lambert-Smith they really liked, and he emerged last week. I think he'll be a big factor this week. But Jahan Dotson's he's more of a slot guy to me, but he made the 60-yard catch last week to get them the lead late in the game, and he's probably the guy that's going to get the most targets. But they're going to need somebody to step up, whether it's Cam Sullivan-Brown, who didn't play for undisclosed reasons last week. Whether he comes back and has a big game. Daniel George has potential. He's a good blocker in the running game, but these just aren't the speed guys you see that Ohio State puts out year after year after year. Penn State's they're going to have to make the catches. They're going to have to make a guy miss, get some yards, but they're not speed burners there. Their deep threat really is Freiermuth, and whether they can break him downfield and get him open on some posts.
Now, on the other side of the ball in the defense, the pass rushing ends Penn State has this year are pretty darn good. I mean, you mentioned him earlier, Shaka Toney, Jason Owe. Is that the strongest spot on the defense this year?
Yeah, I would say probably it is. I think they really believed that they were going to be outstanding off the edge, and I think generally they were against Indiana. Jason Owe was in Penix's face all day. And if you go back and look, the bad throws Penix made, he was kind of rushed into some inaccurate throws, and it was either Owe or Shaka Toney in his face. Adisa Isaac got called for a really key face mask call at the end of the game on a sack. It took a sack away, and you go back and look at the replay, and he had the inside of the shoulder pads. It was a really bad call. It was maybe a worse call than the one at the end of the game for Penn State. But those 3 guys, I think they're going to be able. They could play with anybody. I mean, they're going to be a handful for Ohio State. Always a guy who hasn't played very much, but he somehow wound up in mock drafts in the first round in the offseason. He's just a physical freak. But Tony's a guy, they really go as Shaka Toney goes. He had a couple of sacks in the fourth quarter on Penix. I thought at that point, they were going to have a tough time coming back. Indiana was, but he had a couple sacks on first and second down, and then almost got him again on third down. So they're really, really tough off the edge. They stopped the run really well. I thought they did a good job against Stevie Scott last week, and that's a credit to the two defensive tackles are really underrated. Antonio Shelton and PJ Mustipher. And Fred Hansard comes off the bench and does a good job there. So they're three deep at the end and at the tackle, and a legitimate three deep there. I think the defensive line this year is probably, it's fair to say, their strength. But I thought they played well in the secondary, better than I thought on Saturday.
Linebacker U is going to be a little shorthanded at linebacker this week. Jesse Luketa is going to sit out the first half because of a targeting penalty. How big of a loss is that for them?
It's massive. And Franklin I thought that was a decent call. I mean, he led with the helmet. He was trying to hit him with the shoulder, but he got him with the helmet. It was helmet to helmet, and that's the rule. And it's whether it's a good rule or not, it's the rule. So they're going to lose Luketa. But the big deal there, Penn State linebackers had 8 tackles total against Indiana. I don't even know how it was possible. They didn't have a whole lot of snaps to play, but and they did use that star safety in there, Jair Brown, a little bit more than I thought they would. But they have 2 5-star linebackers coming in with Brandon Smith, who's going to start, and I think Lance Dixon's going to have to play in Luketa's place. And they didn't make a tackle. They were just and they were running themselves out of plays. They just weren't very good in my estimation. And they're going to have to be outstanding moving forward. Not just because they're going to need them this week in the first half with Luketa out, but they're replacing a legend. Micah Parsons was a dominant football player. I mean, anybody who saw the Cotton Bowl last year knows that. And that's a kid who had played linebacker 2 years in his life, and he became the best linebacker in the country. So I think to replace him, obviously you can't replace him, but you have to get some production out of that position. They got nothing. So this week they're going to have to find a way with Smith and Lance Dixon or somebody else to get in there and make some plays from the linebacker position, because they made 8 total tackles. Luketa had 3 of them, and Ellis Brooks, the middle linebacker, had the other 5, and nobody else is so much has gotten a game other than Dixon and Smith. So Dixon and Smith have to be big time players this weekend for them, especially in the first half, because Luketa's he's a good player, but he's not the big difference maker Micah Parsons is. Nobody.
Ohio State's passing attack looked pretty sharp against Nebraska. As you said earlier, the wide receiver unit is right up there. Might be the best Ohio State's had. Penn State secondary looked real solid against the Hoosiers. This is obviously a little bit of a step up in competition. So how confident are the Lions in that secondary right now, and how deep are they comfortable going in their cornerback rotation right now?
I think they'll give Ohio State the stiffest test. These are the best cornerbacks these receivers will face. I think. I don't know. Michigan might argue with me, but I really thought Joey Porter Jr. played well last week, and he's an interesting guy. His dad is obviously the former Steelers linebacker. He had a sack last week. He could do a little bit of everything. He stops the run. He's an NFL looking cornerback. Long arms, long legs. He is all over guys. He did a great job on Whop Phillier last week and Freifogel. They were. I thought that was the best they had played an Indiana team in the secondary. But another guy who I think Penn State fans should be excited about, and he doesn't really get much attention because he really struggled down the stretch last season, was Tariq Castro Fields. He was injured for the second half of last season and played very poorly. He played very well in the first game. So I think those 2 guys are going to be tough for those top 2 Ohio State guys. The question for me in the secondary is the safeties, because teams have been able to take advantage of Lamont Wade, the safety, really gambling a little bit. He gets the ball back for Penn State, as we saw last year in the Ohio State game. I think he forced 3 turnovers himself, but Indiana took advantage of him in the deep passing game on Saturday. He gave up the game-winning touchdown in overtime to Phillier, and I just think that's where they're going to have to take advantage here, because I think the Penn State cornerbacks actually played well. So Indiana's receivers have given Penn State so many issues over the years that it leads me to think that maybe this group's a little better than people give it credit for. So I'll be interested to see that matchup. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the Ohio State receivers they're just a mile ahead of everybody else's, and Penn State don't even compare to what Ohio State has. I mean, Penn State would like to have 2 or 3 of those guys that Ohio State doesn't play, honestly. But I think it'll be an interesting matchup, and it's going to be it's not going to be just the cornerbacks. It's going to have to be Owe and Isaac and Shaka Tony are going to have to get Fields. And when they get him in their sights, they're going to have to bring him down, because if he's able to break contain, he's going to make an outstanding throw and make a big play downfield. And that's just the kind of quarterback he is.
One lingering question for this weekend is the status of Chris Olave for Ohio State. After the game on Saturday, Ryan Day said, yeah, he'll be fine. And then Tuesday, when we talked to Garrett Wilson, he said, yeah, he talked to him and he's planning to play. And then when we asked Ryan Day about it, Day said, we may have to move people around. We'll see. Day never, ever, ever wants to talk about injuries. So you never know quite how much to read into that. But that's going to be one of those interesting things to keep an eye on before the game on Saturday. Is Olave warming up? Is he dressed? All of that. So one thing that did not go real well last week at all for Penn State was in the kicking game. You mentioned Jake Pinniger missed a 25-yarder right before the half, 0 for 3 on field goals all the day, misses from 25, 47, and then 57 right at the end. 57, definitely an excusable one. But, how big of a concern is that for James Franklin? If this game is going to come down to a kick, like what is his confidence level this weekend?
He's going to say it's high. And the reason he's going to say it's high is because those guys haven't missed many field goals over the last year. Pinniger, I think, was 11 for 12. He missed more field goals against Indiana than he did last season. And Jordan Stout, he's their 50-plus guy. And I think he missed the 57-yarder, and I think it was probably good from 55. It was close. He is a legitimately good kicker. So is Pinniger. The problem with Pinniger is sometimes he goes into a funk, and you wonder if this is the funk. The play leading into they got a really big fumble, Wade forced a fumble right before the half, set him up to get within 4 points, make it 17-13, I think. And you just had this feeling that Pinniger was going to hit the post, and he hit the post. And that's just, you get that feeling with him sometimes that it's just not going to go well for him. It wouldn't shock me if he comes out and goes 4 for 4 on field goals and hits a game winner. And it wouldn't shock me if he goes 0 for 4. But he's a good kicker. So is Stout. I think James Franklin is going to say we have the utmost confidence in those guys that they're going to get the job done. But I'll say this. They were not supposed to struggle on special teams. Their special teams units are supposed to be really good, and they were really, really bad against Indiana. I do the report card every week like everybody does, and I give them an F. And I don't know if I've given 3 Fs in 16 years covering this team. They got one for that because they were just bad all around. Bad in the return game. Lamont Wade made a really bad decision on a kickoff return and got taken down at the 5. They're lucky they didn't lose a fumble in the punt return game. And then they miss a couple of field goals. The 57-yarder is excusable. Maybe even the 47-yarder, except he wasn't even close. The 25-yarder you have to hit in a game where you're playing in overtime. It's the first thing that comes into your mind. Hey, they missed a 25-yard field goal. But I think going home will help them. But there's a lot of questions right now as far as, is this unit that was supposed to be really, really good taking 5 steps backwards? And I think we're going to see pretty early on Saturday if that's the case. But the fact that the questions are there is a major concern for Penn State.
You mentioned going home potentially helping Penn State. They will not have quite as much of a home field advantage as they normally would, obviously, because what is normally one of the craziest nights in all of college football with the whiteout in primetime is still in primetime, but with about 105,000 fewer people probably than there would be in a typical year. If it's anything like last weekend in Columbus, it's going to be a little surreal. Multiple Ohio State players and coaches use the word weird to describe the atmosphere inside the stadium. How much does it hurt Penn State to not have that crowd there this weekend?
I think it's a major factor. And I asked James Franklin that today, and he basically said, we're not going to even try to do anything to replicate the atmosphere because you can't. And you can't replicate the whiteout, 107,000 screaming fans, the fireworks. You can't do it. I think their view is we're going to make it so different that it'll throw Ohio State off. But that crowd is worth some points. If you saw last year's game, the whiteout game against Michigan couldn't get the first play off. They took a delay a game on the first play because they couldn't hear. I think the whiteout to me is the great equalizer in the Penn State-Ohio State rivalry because the last time they played in Happy Valley, it was a 1-point game. The 2016 game, Penn State miraculously somehow very outmanned won the game. So I don't know what to expect from this. I would think just from my own personal viewpoint, I would think this is going to be the, oh my God, this is very weird moment of the year for me. And and the weirdest year you could possibly have. I think this is going to be the weirdest scenario I'm going to be in, an empty Beaver Stadium. But I certainly think the empty Beaver Stadium helps Ohio State and doesn't help Penn State. But they're trying to put the good spin on it. They're trying to say, hey, look, you don't even hear the crowd when you're so locked into this kind of a game that you don't even hear the crowd. But at the very least, Ohio State doesn't get the disadvantage of having 107,000 people screaming while they're trying to snap the ball. So I think it's going to help Ohio State, and it's definitely going to be as strange a situation as you can have. And I think all things being equal, if James Franklin had his way, he'd play this game at Ohio State and hope next year they could put fans in the Beaver Stadium.
My assumption right now is that with the Ohio State offense, the amount of talent they have kind of across the field, it's going to take a lot to hold this team under 30 points in a game. So which to you is the more likely path to a Penn State win this weekend? Does Penn State score more than 30, or do they have to try and hold the Buckeyes under 30 and scrape out a 20? I mean, the last time it was at Penn State, it was 27-26. Do they have to try and win a game 27-26, 28-27, something like that?
I think they have to score, and that's just generally. I think they could certainly hold Ohio State under 30 if everything in the world goes right for them on defense. They got to force a couple of turnovers and all that stuff against a quarterback who doesn't turn the ball over and who's super accurate and all that. But I think just the way they operate, the way they kind of approach the way college football is played these days, they know you have to score. They want to get over the top and have an offense that could make the defense look good. You can put them in a position to have to get a stop here and there and win the game because they did it. I think they would tell you they have to score 35 and maybe win at 35-31. Whether they can do that or not without Journey Brown and without Noah Cain and without a real dangerous deep threat in the passing game, I don't know. But the games in this series have been strange. And I don't know what kind of atmosphere having no atmosphere at all means at Beaver Stadium for Ohio State or for Penn State. So I don't know what factor that's going to play, but just judging on paper what they have, I would think Penn State, they'll want to try to hold Ohio State under 30. But if they I bet you if I told James Franklin, hey, you're going to hold Ohio State under 30, they'd say they'd win the game. I would guess that's a goal, but not a reality for them. I think they have to score 35 to 40 points to win this one.
All right, Donnie, let people know where they can find you on Twitter and where they can find your work online.
You can find my Penn State work at Penn State TT on Twitter. My own personal Twitter account with all my columns on it is at Donnie Collins TT. And on online, the Times-Tribune. Actually, I'm wrong. It's the Times-Tribune.com. So if you want to go there and check out the newspaper, the work we're doing, and look, there's a Penn State page and a blog there and everything, and you can check out all the coverage there.
I do love the fact that you are from Scranton, home of one legendary TV sitcom, and you're wearing a shirt from Pawnee, Indiana, the home of another legendary TV sitcom. The good synergy there. Really, really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Thank you very much. And if you've listened all the way through and are that interested in this weekend's game, hey, you are probably exactly the type of person that would enjoy a membership to BuckeyeScoop.com. Cost the price of a bad chain store pizza. You'll get access to our incredible team of insiders, plus all sorts of great members-only content. We will be at this weekend's game in Happy Valley, and with limited seating in the press box, that is definitely not true of everyone on the Ohio State beat. So you can sign up today at BuckeyeScoop.com, get immediate access to our incredible team of insiders. Alex Gleitman just dropped an ADEC column on all those tweets you've probably seen about news that may be coming to the 2022 class that they say will break the internet. Plus, the incredible X's and O's piece that we talked about on Tuesday's show with Ross Fulton is up as well. And there's so much more there, so give it a shot. We know you will love it. It's all at BuckeyeScoop.com. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for sticking through a much longer than normal show for Wednesday, but had a great conversation. Really appreciate Donnie joining us and sharing some insight on what you might be able to expect at Beaver Stadium on Saturday. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.